After the last video, which was my first experience with OmniScripts, and directionally helpful, but lots of little challenges, it's definitely worth a recap since there are so many issues to address. Here's my notes on the entity relationship diagram for dynamic assessment. I want to work through the objects that we've created just to show you what we've got. So we started with assessment question, and here's a list view of the assessment questions with details. And opening one of these assessment questions to show you the relationships, here's the initial fire inspection. It's always interesting to look at the compact layout to see what was considered important by the developers, given that it's a standard object and a standard layout. So we have a developer name, active question version, and a category. So clicking on related, we see that we have an assessment question version. And this same assessment question version, which is marked active, and here's the question, is showing in the compact layout as a link in the category. We also have assessment question assignments. Not sure what that is. I'm also not sure why notes and attachments are viewed as the first tab here. What notes and attachments would we be uploading for the assessment question? Opening this assessment question, plenty of interesting information is captured here, including a repeat of the question text. Looking at the related, we have the regulatory use, again notes and attachments, and then we have Omni Process Assessment Question versions. Now, Omni Process Assessment Question versions have both an Omni Process and an Omni Process Element. And we see that here, an Omni Process and an Omni Process Element. We've got unique records, and if we go out and look at the first one, it's really all the information they were going to share. And there are no related records. So it's related to an inspection question version, which is how we got here, but it also has an Omni Process Element and an Omni Process. Now it turns out an Omni Process Element is master detailed to Omni Process. But seeing what looks like an API name here, opening these, or at least two samples, what I found was the process element include this very extensive process set configuration and a record ID ending E88, optional _fire _inspection. If I go out and look at a different one, what I see is a different record ID using the same name, API name, what it looks like. So it's interesting that we can have the same API names for two different Omni Process elements with two different record IDs. Again, so much more to learn about Omni Process. So stepping up to the Omni Assessment Task, we saw this in the last video, because this is where we created the Omni Task to get everything started. And so if we look at the T6, again, this is where we looked at creating the OmniScript. There are no related records. So I'm going to take this off because I don't think it exists there. So this Omni Task, assessment task, is related to the Omni Process and form. There's no direct relationship. And looking out into the page layouts, we see we really only have Omni Assessment Task history. So there's no additional records that we can relate as a related list. This Omni Assessment Task is especially relevant as we look at the next step. We're creating an action plan template, and what we're doing is connecting it with a generic assessment task type of fire safety assessment. And in the prior unit, remember that we called the Omni Assessment Task assessment, we called the script a check. But before we go to the action plan, looking back at the Omni Process object, here's a list view of all with details. We can see that the T6 is marked active. It's an OmniScript with a type Salon Assessment and Safety. Let's open this one. And what we find is a relatively empty, compact layout. It means they either don't expect us to look at it or there really isn't much helpful information. It's marked as active, but there's plenty of other content here, including this very long field, which is the property set configuration, which is where Omni Process does its magic. If we're looking for related records, we don't find any. And taking a look at the Object Manager, the fields and relationships, well, we find there's just one lookup, no other relationships looking up. So we can look at the page layouts, and looking at related lists, we do have an Omni Assessment Question versions. And what I did was to drag and drop that into related list. And with a refresh, we can take a look at the Omni Process and see that for T6, we actually have 3 questions. Remember that we added in the last step. And we have question versions. We also have Omni Process Element. So from this record, it looks up to here and to the question version. The last one worth looking at is we actually have an OmniScript object, but it displays as OmniStudio, so I can actually get to it as an object, but it shows as OmniStudio. Now with these, if we expand them, remember we had contract amend types, we also had Salon Assessment Safety types, and we can expand these and see that we had again the T6, which is active, and here's that T6 version, which is showing as OmniScript. And if we go out to the Object Manager and we look up Omni, can't find it here, but I was able to add it here as a navigation object. And since you're still with me, this was the error that we ran into performing this step. We hit it, we build OmniScript, we got an error. And if we look at the error that this guy posted, that same piece, right? We added 3 fire safeties, 3 building standards. We get the error. There was this comment, which was talking about including questions with related questions. And what I ended up doing was deleting off the one section, and it seemed to work, although it didn't. But anyway, this is at least still out there. And I'll include a link because hopefully there's been more resolution since this was posted. And I didn't know much about Vlocity, so I did a quick lookup. And I'm just tagging this on the end. This was an acquisition in 2020 of 1,000 people for 1.3 billion. Good business. Interesting that Salesforce is the largest investor in Vlocity, and others were Accenture and others. So this just shows Salesforce's commitment to this product, and we'll have to see how it all evolves. But we'll learn more as we proceed, even if it is a rather difficult piece of configuration to learn. And now we can take a quick look at building action plans for dynamic assessments, which was very similar to what we did with inspections. Thanks for sticking with this.